I always like to check the Facebook before I go live with my clients or my guest because they're so smart and I don't want to waste their time. So I always like to go over on Facebook. So I'm going to go over on Facebook. Hold on. Yep, sounds pretty good over there. Thank you to the Facebook gods for letting us go live again. I've had this guest on. I'm thinking now there's probably 3 or 4 guests that could get the belt. Like the boxing belt, like I got back there of the most appearances on During the Break podcast. It's a very prestigious award. We're working on a ceremony. We may rent out a coliseum, bring us some folks in. It'll be a star-studded red carpet event, everybody, and it will be a coveted award. So she's in the running. I don't know if that means anything to her with all the certificates she has on the wall, but she owns Journey Beyond Divorce. Now I'm going to clear my throat. Excuse me. And then I'm going to be transparent. I met my guest originally, go back about 6 or 7 years ago, going through a divorce. I'm listening to podcasts. Of course, you get on the treadmill, you're going to make your life better. This is okay. We're going to get through this. All the things you say, you're crying, you're laughing. Some days you're high-fiving yourself, and some days you're, eating ice cream on the couch and saying, well, I'm just going to stay here for the day. But I started listening to a lot of podcasts. I ran across Karen as a guest on podcast. And then I started researching her and her company. And to be honest with you, everybody has their own vibe, right? Their own energy. What she and her team and the podcast I was listening to at the time, what they were saying just hit me. And it just hit me at the right moment, at the right time. It gave you that little bit of hope. Okay, other people have walked this path. And so that means I can walk it as well. And it just became part of my routine for literally 2 or 3 months on a daily basis. Her, along with 3 or 4 other consistent voices in the back of my brain that were walking me through the moments of grief and the moments of happiness and the moments of, confusion and doubt. And so with that being said, when I started this podcast, I was like, I want her to spread the good stuff with everybody. And her business has changed a little bit over the years. We'll talk about that. But the thing I like about what she does, and I'm going to bring her up in about 3 seconds, is she also can work with people, to determine if they need to get the divorce. It's not always, well, I'll let her tell it. What the hell am I doing here? This is ridiculous. What's up, Karen McMahon? How you doing?
Hi, Clint.
I'm going to minimize you again. Let me just talk for you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm now the representative for Karen. She's too good for you. I will speak for her. Tell everybody what you do. Why am I doing this? I'm 3 minutes in and you're sitting there going, yeah, I don't even know why you need me, man.
Hey, Clint.
Hey.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Tell everybody exactly what you do so I don't butcher it again.
Yeah, so I'm a relationship coach. I focus on helping people mend or end their marriages. And it's always a delight and a blessing when I can work with a couple on mending something. And often we have individuals come to us who either their spouse or they have already made the decision to end. And so in that case, we really come alongside them through this very overwhelming and difficult journey and support them both emotionally and logistically through the entire process so that they can emerge having used the pain to heal and get healthy and be better on the other side.
Yeah, and we'll get into some specific topics. We're going to talk about boundaries. We're going to let you define what high conflict is. By the way, if you see her from time to time literally fist fighting her microphone, it's because that microphone apparently does not want to be part of the podcast. It moves away. So from time to time, you will see her stop smiling and go, get the heck back over.
My entire relationship with it since I bought it, it does that. It just starts moving away from me.
One of the things though that you said is, and I think it's, if anybody's listening to this on the audio side of it and they're where I was on the second day on the treadmill, and you're like 20 years in, this was my identity. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, now what am I? And it works through. I want to say to them that you just said something I think is pretty important, is that the pain, if we learn how to handle it, does become useful. That it becomes a tool, right?
Yeah, and I think we could say that about almost any trial or tribulation, because really when people graduate or complete with us, the idea is divorce is one of the most devastating transitions you're going to go through. If you develop the skill set, the mindset to do this, where you're allowing the pain to fuel the transformation, whether you go broke or you get, you get fired, or you have a loved one who, develops an illness, like,
Hmm.
you're going to have a foundation that's so rock solid for going forward. And we just happen to be using the the process and paradigm of divorce to help you learn all of that.
Yeah, one of the things that was that I think I knew, but I never actually had to put into practice because well, let me back up. I think one of the things that we hear, but we may not put into practice a lot of times, is the emotions and the pain comes in waves. And I know that sounds silly. And when I was in it, that pissed me off so much. I'm like, it's only waves. That's the only thing I've got. There's waves everywhere. What are you talking about? It comes in waves. It's one big, giant, stupid wave. And you just have to learn that those waves get a little smaller and there's more distance between them. But in the middle of it, it's hard to trust that this too shall pass.
Yeah, and I think that there's part of it just needs to be acknowledged that in the beginning it's a tsunami.
Yeah.
And anybody who's like, who diminishes that, that's because they're uncomfortable with your pain and discomfort. And then they probably shouldn't be on your all-star support team. They should be on the bench.
Well, I like how you put it. And I will say one thing, that my last piece of advice just from going through it, not as a coach or anything. And then I'm going to ask you about some stuff you have going on inside your business and how you're helping people. One thing that I learned is whether if you are not the one that initiated the divorce, if someone has asked you for the divorce, said, "Hey, I am divorcing you," and they had been thinking about it for a while, it is easy to look, maybe and maybe not. If they don't do it with a lot of emotion or as much emotion as you think they should have, usually that's because they have already processed that emotion for the last 6 months or 2 or 3 years. And it's not a reflection of they didn't love you and maybe don't even still love you in their own way now. It's just changed. It's just that they're at a point now that they're further down that road of dealing with that tsunami than you have. They've probably been just dealing with it maybe in a silent way that you were not aware of. And maybe because that's there's other issues there. But am I right on that?
Yeah, we actually did a podcast on when your spouse is emotionally out of step with you in the
Mm,
divorce, and that's
mm,
exactly it. If like I left, and it was, I think, in and out of marriage counseling for 3 years, and so my grief started uh, early on, and then hope, and then grief, and then hope, and then grief. And so by the time I had made my decision and knew that there was no turning back, he was just starting and I
yeah.
was miles down the road. And that doesn't mean there wasn't emotion, but so much that has to be processed in the beginning, that denial, that depression, that anger, like that bargaining, all of those. The person who has decided to leave may be filled with guilt and shame and other things, but some of that grief processing has been done.
Yeah. And I try to tell people this too. Unless there's a psychopath involved, no one gets married and goes, you know what, 4 years, I'm getting a divorce. I'm going to tear this family apart in 4 years. I cannot wait to watch them cry. They're sad. They're upset it's ending too. They didn't get married with the intent of going, man, I can't wait till this marriage is over. So it's been painful for them too. So just, that's another danger I fell into. And again, the podcast helped me because I would hear what you just said on these other podcasts in the back of my brain. I just would keep reminding myself, just focus on you, focus on the kids, don't get bitter. And that's the thing. I did not want to become a bitter person.
Yeah.
And that's where I found the stuff that I ran into with your podcast and a few others. Those voices helped me process it because I didn't want to hold on to stuff. So, yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's the podcast. I'm just kidding. This is 10 minutes in. All right. Hey, you have got something coming up And well, let's start it this way. First of all, how are you liking podcasting? How's your podcast look different than it did a year or so ago? And are you doing it all the time now? Because I don't keep up with it as much as I used to. I
Yeah.
just see it on Facebook all the time.
Yeah, so I got a little crazy for a while. I was doing like 4 episodes a week, which probably doesn't sound crazy to you because you probably do like 10 a week. But
Yeah.
the average normal human being doesn't do 10 a week,
Yeah.
Mr. Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Um, and
Small,
so
tiny part. Yeah.
so I was up to like 4 where I was like a podcaster who coached, and so now we're putting out 2 a week. So we always, as you know, but I'll let your listeners know. So I designed my podcast a little differently. So everything I do is within a series. And so just recently, we're actually at the tail end of an all things parenting series. And so
Mm.
it's parenting specialists in general, people who specialize in amicable co-parenting, people who specialize in high conflict co-parenting, which looks very different than amicable co-parenting, step parenting, which if you thought co-parenting was hard, holy cow, talking to those people were wild. So we're doing this all things parenting series, and then right on the tail of it, we're about to start a divorce trauma recovery series looking at alternative modalities. So not just therapy, but looking at neurosomatic work that cuts into the trauma and stops it, or tapping is another one that, because our clientele, and I'll get to that in a minute, tend to be very traumatized. I just interviewed a guy yesterday on rapid resolution therapy, brilliant hypnosis. So what I do in my podcast is I like to, if I'm going to bring a topic to the table, I try to get a fairly holistic perspective of it. And so that's what we've been doing. And it's going great. I mean, we continue to build.
That's fantastic. I'm going to throw the only thing I will throw in there, and you probably did it, and it's I'm not the expert. I found, and I find with others that focusing on movement, activity, and health. And I know that everybody says this. It's the divorce diet. Everybody goes through it. I'll show the world. By God, I'm not finished yet. I know people go through that, but in my world, the activity part of movement, giving my body time to work out stress. Sometimes it's good to be so tired you can't stay up and think about things. I'm too tired for my brain to run crazy tonight. And then if you're, again, this is Clint Powell's. It's what it is, what it's worth. You're paying, right? If you're paying, if it's free, it's worth that. I think if you're over 35 or 40, you should go get your hormones checked. And here's why: because if your hormones are low on any front, it will affect your perspective, your energy, your level. I've got friends now. I've got a friend of mine who is a licensed therapist, and she sends people to, let's do a hormone panel for you if you're over 40. And here, especially when the communication, it clouds your vision. It just does, and it makes it harder to carry the extra weight of a stress of relationships, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And most people going through divorce, like our sweet spot, it's rather large, but it's kind of like 45 to 65 is the lion's share of
Yep.
our clientele and our listeners. And so that's when it's hitting. You're getting into that. I mean, for women, it's peri, pre, and then menopausal, but guys have a similar
Yeah.
shifting of hormones.
Yeah, testosterone, and it's getting, and men have testosterone issues at a younger age now. And I've just said now I'm a big believer. I've got Josh, a friend of mine that owns. He's a physician's assistant, but he owns a business here in a couple of different cities in Tennessee, and we've talked about it. It amazes me when you, just like with the subconscious stuff, you don't know how it's affecting your communication. You don't know that what you learned when you were 10 from your parents is affecting how you're talking to your spouse when you're 35. You don't know what you don't know when it comes to how your hormones are affecting how I'm relating to you, how we're responding to the world, why I'm so tired, why am I crying all the time. And if you're going to go through a divorce, I would think you would want your foundational, from financial to spiritual to health, to all be as solid as possible so you can be your best version of you moving forward. That is just my take. So there we
I
go.
think that's a great point. Yeah.
You said a little bit, though, we're going to talk about a 5-day boundary challenge, but a minute ago before we went live, you were saying that you're still doing all the relationship coaching stuff, but you have shifted a little bit Are you still taking general clients, or have you fallen into the niche of high conflict divorce? And what is that?
Yeah. So, in general, I think we even coach outside of relationship coaching. So it's like we've got a rock solid team of coaches. So if someone comes and says, I'm struggling with my emerging adult child, we'll coach them. But what we market to is largely the divorce coaching. So the relationship coaching, the mending has even come to me through more clients who are like, you were great with me. I've got this couple. Can you work with them? So what we're transitioning from, Clint, and thanks so much for asking, is, I started back in 2010. And so there's just a lot more coaches out there, right? The industry was in its infancy then, and we're just toddlers now, but there's many, many more divorce coaches. And so we've chosen the micro niche of high conflict divorce. And I've chosen that for a number of reasons. One is I know it like the back of my hand. For some reason, we've attracted a lot of high conflict people. And so I've done a lot of podcasts and what have you on that. And it it's a heavier lift. And so there's a lot of divorce coaches out there who have been trained in the nuts and bolts of the process and how to help people. High conflict divorce, you're married to someone who's severely traumatized by childhood stuff, who has neurodivergence through some kind of mental health issues or personality disorder or addiction. Um,
You okay? You look like you just had something happen.
Yeah, I did. My screen just went off, which is, give me just 1 second.
Yeah, take your time. And I was telling her before we came on, the reason I wanted her to,
So,
excuse me, is to define it is because, in my world, when I went through my divorce, everything was high conflict. Even though it was very, air quote, easy, it was just a few months. We ended up, we like each other. We still talk, and she was amicable, all that. But it was high conflict because had, new address, new phone numbers, new bank accounts. Everything's new. And I'm worried about the kids and I'm crying. And so it seemed high conflict to me. But when I talk to you, it's like, that's not a high conflict divorce.
yeah, and so you're dealing with you're marrying into a person who has these complexities,
Mhm.
and you're only doing that if you have your own complexities.
Yeah.
And so, if people ask me all the time, well, what's high conflict? To your point, Clint, if you're getting divorced, there's conflict. So we're not talking about a zero conflict versus high conflict. There's going to be conflict.
Right.
You're disagreeing, you're not happy with each other, you've come to the end for whatever reason. There's going to be some stress, there's going to be tension, there's going to be conflict. So what's the difference between your garden variety conflict,
Yep.
right? Because the people who like do it yourself and hug and kiss and have a ceremony, they're really the minimal, the smallest group. The garden variety frustration is pretty normal. So here's a couple of the tells, and it brings me into my quiz that I want to talk about. So
Okay.
if you have a partner who, and I don't like using the word always and never, but I'm going to, who's
Okay.
never wrong. It's always your fault. You're always the cause of it. And even if you weren't the cause of it, if you did something different, they wouldn't have done it. Like, so if you have someone who's in that category, like a 365-degree blind spot around being able to see their responsibility in anything, that's a sign of high conflict. If you have someone who's very black and white in their thinking, there's no gray, it's either yes or no, it's either right or wrong. That is, if you think about it, even as you listen to it, it's like there's no room to negotiate and be flexible. If you have a spouse who truly lacks empathy, like you could be sitting there and crying and talking about your concern about yourself or the kids, and they're just like, they don't
Stoic.
have a reaction.
Yeah.
That's it. If you have someone who always blames and accuses, and so no matter what you bring to the table, you're wrong, or if you have somebody who there's a deflect and defend dance. I come to you and I'm like, look, this issue's been really concerning me. And your response is almost always, really, well, I have the same concern because you did, and they deflect, and so you find yourself on the defensive. Your concern, your agenda almost never is addressed because they just hijack it. These are a few of the typical tells, um, when you're in a high conflict marriage and into a high conflict divorce. You're actually afraid of sharing your emotions and your feelings because of the reaction that you're going to get. These are some of the things that, um, most of our high conflict divorce people deal with. And if you just take a moment and think, okay, let me put myself in that paradigm, and you might be thinking, that, oh, that's a little bit like my uncle or my mom or like or my boss. Like you may know somebody like that, and then you say, okay, well, you've been married. This is your person. They're supposed to have your back. They're supposed to be like the one advocating for you. And
Right.
okay, so that fell apart. Now you're going into a divorce. Screw you. You're not going to get the kids. You're not going to get the money. I'm not going to
Right.
agree to
I'm
anything.
not
And so
signing
it
those papers. What are you
becomes,
doing? Yeah.
yeah, it's all your fault. You're an idiot. Oh, we're going to court. That's because you're wasting the money. You're going to blow. Like it's just that.
Yeah, and real quick, you keep going, but the kids thing too. Well, I'm trying to. I just want to take care of the kids. I don't know why you're wanting to make this way. I mean, this is
Right,
so
right,
now you feel they're using that against you too.
right. And actually, many high conflict individuals weaponize the children.
Hmm.
They and when it comes to the quintessential narcissist, which is only one in a wide range, which I think is a shame what's going on, in social media, that everyone's a narcissist. But a quintessential narcissist will leave all of the money and all of the children bloody on the battlefield
Yeah.
because they have such a drive to win and to hurt you because you offended their ego, their self so deeply by deciding that you didn't want to be in this relationship
Yeah.
anymore.
Janelle said, a decade in court is high conflict. I would assume that's a lot of high conflict. A decade. I had a friend that took him almost 2.5 years.
Wow.
And that was before, I was about 10 years before my divorce. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't understand that. I was just, and of course, at the same time, I thought, well, this is how I'm going to die as divorced. I mean, as a married, I never thought as, and so when I first started going through mine, I'm like, I can't do this emotion for 2 years. I don't, and I was fortunate that we kind of worked ours out rather
Yeah.
quickly. But yeah, it doesn't have to be long though, right? I mean, you can have high conflict in a short series, or not really. Oh, you're.
Mine was 3.5
I
years, and
noticed the smile.
we we had no money, and it was kind of going to be 50-50 custody from the
Yeah.
get-go. And it was a 3.5 year, multi tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah. And one of the things that an attorney, it was actually, I had to hire an attorney for the children. We had to hire a psychological forensic to evaluate the custody, like the whole 9 yards. So I was in it up to my neck without really a penny to spend on it, but we did. And the attorney said to me, uh, and this goes for all divorces. He said, "Your divorce will move as quickly as the slowest moving person."
Mm.
And that I have found 12 years into doing what I do very, very true. So I have so many clients who come to me and it's like, I want it to be amicable. I want it to be fast. I want the kids to be okay. And that we're going to mediate. We're going to do this quickly. And then you say, so tell me a little bit about your disagreements with your spouse. How often did you come to resolution, reconciliation,
Mhm.
work things out, come up with never?
Yeah.
Okay, so your amicable divorce is coming from where? And so my other saying, and I'll just throw this out there, is how goes the marriage, so goes the divorce.
Oh. Oh. Oh, that was that one. Okay. Because yeah. Okay. Huh. Hold on a
Yep.
second. I got to make some more noises. What? Okay. Now I've never heard you say that, but now that I've heard you say that, and I'm looking back, absolutely. That is 100%. Yeah, I see that now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Now
So
we
people come in very delusional in the beginning. It's like because I deeply want something amicable, we'll have something amicable. And it's like, well, you know,
listen. I
what
don't
is the
mind saying
history?
some stuff personal on here because I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. I would never do that to any of my friends or even my ex because she's a good woman and she's a good mother and we had a good life for a long time. So, and I would never, so I would never throw anybody like that. I will say this: one of the I've had friends say to me the way that I handled the divorce, nothing to do with the other side, how Clinton handled the divorce was great for the kids and great for moving past it and healing emotionally quick, but it was a terrible business decision. And um and that not that making air quote, I don't think that, but if you do call that a bad business decision, just basically saying whatever. I just want these the only thing I want is this one that was around kids. Everything else I that brings a whole nother room of stress that doesn't go without its own consequences when the divorce is final.
Yeah.
I will say, as much as stress as that may have bought me, and how many backward steps it took me, I'm glad I did it that way though, because I think it got the children to a place of healing very quick or quicker, and me as well. And it was not going to change anything on as far as the direction we were going. It was basically going to be more self-inflicting wounds, if that makes sense. And I was not willing to do that to me or the kids. And she was very willing as well. She wanted it to move quickly. Now, with that being said, I look at it now as I was fortunate that because even in that scenario, the other person can be very narcissistic, and that's not how she was during the process of the divorce.
I had a client who married for 36 years, high net, so they had a lot. They had a they had two homes, but they had one big home. And she moved into the smaller home during the divorce process. And when it came to the personal property, which the attorneys never want to deal with, it's the last thing, it's the smallest, financial value.
Mm-hmm.
She gave him 90% and asked for 10%, and he took her to court to try and get 90% of her 10%. This is quintessential
High
what
conflict.
happens
Yeah.
with high conflict. Like you shake your head and go, why? Like, why did you want her bloomers? Like it just got to a point where it's like, just because I can, because it's a fight.
Yes, take the Nike socks. That's fine. I'll take the stuff from Walmart. I'm okay. Can we be done with this? Sign the papers for the love of God.
Yeah.
All right. So that was leading you into now, is that the quiz you're doing, or is it the 5-day boundary challenge, or is that all the same? Are they different?
Yeah. So, what we've done is we invite people in as so many online businesses do. And so as you see us out there, either on the podcast or in social media, what we've created is a toxic quiz. It's 10 toxic tells.
Okay.
And so I spoke to a lot of my clients, and I thought for myself, if someone said to me, like when I was in it's the mending's not working, I think I have to end. If someone said, um, Karen, are you in a toxic relationship? Are you married to a narcissist? Are you in a high conflict situation? I don't think I would have said yes, because after so many years, it gets very normalized. And you also have their voice in your head. It's like, maybe it is me. Maybe I'm too picky. Maybe I'm not articulating well enough. And so our toxic quiz is an opportunity for people to say, okay, where do I fall on the spectrum? Do I just have a difficult marriage? Do I have something that has some real dysfunction to it? Or do I have a uber toxic marriage? And so it's only 10 questions. Once you finish those questions and you get your score, you can't not know. Even answering the questions has this really, I almost want to say, therapeutic and cathartic um, feeling about it, because you're going, there's 10 questions, always, often, sometimes,
I got to
never.
be
And
honest.
it's
I'm going to
like,
go take the test, and I'm been divorced almost 7 years, so I'm going to go take the test.
Yeah.
Let me
And
take a
so
quick.
it's journeybeyonddivorce.com, and it's right at it's the banner on the top of our website. And so it's real easy. It takes 2 or 3 minutes. You immediately get an email. And so that's what we're doing, because we're really looking to support people in who are in toxic relationships. And it's very scary when you're in that kind of a relationship to make the decision to leave, because you're really choosing to go toe to toe with what has been a very big bully in your life. And again, I want to be crystal clear, Clint. There's a lot of people out there who are demeaning and diminishing these high conflict personalities. I've got a client who's married to a high conflict personality. This individual, this woman, is so deeply traumatized by like real hard things that she's been through. There's no reason to be referring to them as evil or anything like that. They're struggling. That doesn't
Mhm.
mean you need to stay in relationship with them. That doesn't mean you want to raise your children with them, because then you're just creating another generation of that. So I think that, one of the things I really want to be bringing to this conversation and to the table is um, heart and empathy
Mhm.
around the fact that life is hard, and no one goes, I think I'm going to wake up every day, be a total asshole, destroy my
Yeah.
family, break my children, bankrupt everyone. Like that's not where the vast majority of people are coming from.
It does us no good to label people. I talk about this in politics too. It's okay to judge people based off their actions. That's 100% how I think we should do that. But it's especially if it's consistent actions. But it's not does us no good to label. And I personally have done podcasts on the other side of this. Is I think we are in a society now where if I'm not in, I so I'm going to say this, and I'm not diminishing anything we've talked about, but I think sometimes in this society we are in a place where if it gets hard, I need to go discover myself. If it's difficult, I'm married to a narcissist. I think we have gotten so thin skinned in this life that it's I too want to be in a high conflict. I've been a high conflict divorce too. I am me too. Look, mine's worse than yours. Oh, look at this. He's a narcissist, or she's a narcissist, or she's demanding, or this. And there's this, I think there's this, we've created this environment because I think a lot of social media, look at me. I've got this hard life too. Sometimes in relationships, there's stuff you got to live with. And I think a quiz like this or talking to somebody like you is helps clarify. It's almost like filtering for, panning for gold, what's
Yeah.
true and what's not true. Okay, they do that. That's a habit. You don't like how they handle the coffee maker. Let's not put that on the list of stuff to break a relationship. Them calling you, an idiot all the time in front of the kids, that's a trait maybe we don't need to live with. In other words, sometimes when you're not happy, you start just assigning all bad things to the other person, and sometimes it's just stuff we got to learn to live with shit too.
Yeah, and I think that
Does
this
that
is
make
why,
sense? That was a lot of rambling.
it makes perfect sense. And I just recently had a situation where a colleague of mine, a coach in a different category, referred a couple to me. And part of the conversation was, you know, I think they're heading for divorce, and, he's clearly a narcissist.
Uh-huh.
And unlike many divorce coaching businesses, we work with men a lot. I would say 30, thirty-five
Has
percent
it
of our
always been like
guys.
that? It's gotten better, hadn't it?
It's where, there's not a lot out there for men, and so
Yeah.
we try
Good
to
for you.
really throw that net out. It's like, well, if most women are marrying men, let's have some divorce coaching for them.
And good job for the men seeking the help. Way to go, dudes.
Exactly.
Good for
So,
you.
so this particular individual, I ended up speaking to the couple, but I spoke individually to the fella, and he was so introspective. He knew his triggers. He knew behaviors that he saw in himself that he didn't like. He knew he didn't have the skill set to rein it in. He knew that it was impacting his relationship. But I think that if you see somebody who is a big personality, and I like to say it that way because I'm a big personality. I have a lot of energy. Now I don't generally get angry, but I can take up a lot of space, and when I do get angry, I know I can be very intimidating. And in today's day and age, it's so easy to then label that person in a way that doesn't serve us. And so going forward, we coach people, and our coaches are really schooled in poking at the narrative that, it's all my husband or it's all my wife and they're A, B, and C,
Mm-hmm.
and bringing it back to, as you know, right? Okay, what's your part in it? And what did you bring to the table? And how can, like, I have this one woman, she's like so chaotic. And I'm like, I hear what's wrong with the experts and the attorney and your ex, and it's incredibly difficult, but I'm seeing things that she's bringing to the table. So what are you bringing to the table? Because you have no agency over there with those people. Where
Mm.
you have power is, are you communicating clearly? Are you communicating in ways where people don't want to answer your calls and don't want to respond to you? And so that's the key of what we're bringing to the table, is really helping people see your situation's difficult. We can support you. We understand this journey. And the best way you can help yourself is to really work on everything you can do to heal and refine.
Yeah, it's really the only way to help yourself, and so yeah, I love that, and yes, it just, if you're listening to this and go, I want to call Karen and set up, or one of her coaches, I think you should. I think the first conversation for a few minutes is free. Where they get to know you. Is that still the case? Because your business model may have changed.
Absolutely.
I will say, if you decide to go down the road with Karen or one of her team members, I can promise you the that relationship's going to be super frustrating, because every time you go, and then they went, and she and okay, I hear you. So how did you respond? I don't want to talk how I responded. Damn it, that's not what we're here to. I'm here to you for you to tell me how right I am, and none of this is my fault. That's what. It's not. You're not going to enjoy that conversation, but it is literally like working out at the gym. That pain will make you stronger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and you asked me a question earlier that I would love. I think it's a good time to bring it up,
Okay.
because I had said to you that my desire as a high conflict divorce coaching firm is to bridge the gap between
Oh,
therapy and coaching,
yes.
because that emotional support, so therapeutic emotional support is so incredibly valuable. It's such a great way for you to be able to say, I didn't lick it off the grass. Where did it come from? What's the family of origin that I was raised in? What are the behaviors, thought behaviors, habits that I'm bringing to the table? And what's created me, even what caused me to be in such an unhealthy marriage. That's the therapist's wheelhouse. They can explain, as mental health experts, they can really explain paradigms. They can help you heal from past traumas. And then clients come to us and they're like, I love my therapist. And I'm like connecting all these dots. But I went home and had an argument with my spouse, and I had nothing, like nothing new, same old, same old, same mistakes. And that's where we bridge the gap, because we are anything but a nuts and bolts coaching firm. And so we do deeply emotional work, but our emotional work is less about your history and more about, okay, so you know that you came from a family where, okay, let's say your dad worked all the time and he was a real hard ass, and you married a guy who works all the time and is a real hard ass. What's your reaction? Oh, so it sounds a lot like your little girl. What did you do? How could you have done it differently? Let's talk about a strategy. What's the mantra that you need? Let's come up with this skill set. Let's try this. How's your boundary setting? How's your communication?
Mm.
And then in the moment, they get to go, I did the same thing I always did. I just blamed and accused, or I screamed and I yelled, or I cried, or I shut down and I didn't do anything. How's that serving you? And so it's very emotional, but it's like taking the depth of emotion and attaching it to the skill set or the change in mindset. And then they move forward and they start seeing change. And that's where the therapy and coaching end up creating the bridge for something new and different.
Yeah, I love that, and I always kind of saw because I was going to a therapist for a few months too, and she was doing great work, and because I just so everybody knows, I went to counseling and coaching as soon as possible because I was determined that again I was going to try to be the healthiest dad I could be, and man I could be moving forward in my life. I was in my late 40s, so I was determined. Well, I don't know if I'm gonna live another 5 years, 5 minutes, or 50 years. I just don't want it to be as broken as I am now. And I knew I was broken in the marriage. Broken people love in broken ways. We both were doing the best we could, and it just, it is what it is. But I always looked at it as therapy was helping me figure out the why. Why, and you guys were helping me figure out the how.
How?
Like,
Yeah.
how am I going to get through tomorrow? How do I take it from my brain to my mouth without being the same dude I was? How do I process this? How do I ride that next wave? And that, the why versus the how to me was a big deal because the with the more clarity, then I could actually spend time on some of the whys. I just couldn't really, I was so cluttered with everything, and I just needed help figuring out just how am I going to cope? What is the next one step I need to do? And it's hard to do that. As much as I love therapy too, how I interact with mom and dad is necessary, but it's not going to help me in the morning when I got to have this mediation meeting. I need,
Right.
I don't know if that
And
makes
I think
sense.
that the other piece of it that helps with the coaching is you get off the phone and you have an action plan.
Yeah.
And a lot of times in therapy, you talk and it's like, okay, the session's over. I'll see you again next week. And let's pick up where we left off. And
Hmm.
okay, the session's over. I'll talk to you next week. And in coaching, it's like, okay, we talked about these challenges you're having. I'm going to send you an article and a podcast to listen to root in what we talked about that resonated with you, and what is that step you can take. So if we're talking about boundaries, since we're about to talk about the boundary challenge, it's like, what is one boundary that you can try? Let's just talk it through. What's the boundary? How are you going to set it? And then how are you going to uphold it? Okay, we're not talking for 2 weeks. Keep in touch. And then 2 weeks from now, the first thing we're doing in that coaching session is, how was your action plan? What'd
Yeah.
you think of the resources? How did that practice go for you? And if the answer is, I didn't do anything, okay, that's good information. Let's see what's going on, because if someone continues to not do anything, then they belong in therapy and not coaching.
Oh, good. I like that you threw that in there. Good job. Because that, yeah, you're stuck, and I can't get you
I,
unstuck. To yeah,
yeah, if we're going to sit here and we're going to have these conversations, and then you're not ready for whatever reason, no judgment, to implement anything, then you're stuck.
you're
You're
stuck.
emotionally locked, and that's not my wheelhouse.
What
I'm
is
about
the
helping people move forward.
what is the boundary challenge?
So once you've taken the quiz and you're like, holy cow, there's some problems in my marriage. I'm difficult, I'm dysfunctional, or I'm highly toxic. The natural question is, well, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to learn how to set boundaries, because healthy relationships require healthy boundaries. And
Okay.
I can guarantee you that 9 out of 10 people who are in at least the dysfunctional and the toxic relationships, boundaries is like asking them to speak Greek, and they're not Greek.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's a whole new language. It's like, what's a boundary and how do I do that? And he or she's going to get very mad at me when I do that.
Hmm.
Exactly. But that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it to be safe. And the boundary challenge, what I love, and I'm not going to give too much away, is the boundary challenge starts with you and all the broken boundaries you have with yourself.
You're just running
And
through them. You're just running through. That's like hurdles. You're not even jumping. You're just running through the hurdle. There's no boundaries with you
yeah,
at all.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you're going to tell me how your spouse doesn't have any boundaries, and that's probably very true. The problem is, neither do you. And so here we have a boundary oblivious household, usually with children who are acting out, because mom and dad have no boundaries, and there's a lot of chaos and tension. And so let's punish little Joey because he like smacked the kid in the schoolyard, but there's no boundaries anywhere.
Mhm.
And so the boundary challenge is 5 days, goes from June 26th to 30th. It's live. It's me, and you get a cheat sheet every single day on a different boundary and how to set it. And in 5 quick days, you have some real basic foundational tools to work with.
You know what? Your dog is you want to be on a podcast. It's okay with me. It's a good podcast. I I will say this. I've got a five, it's called a 5 to 9 coaching podcast. I've got about 100 and something shorter, 3 to 8 minute audios out there. One of them I did, and it came from the just we talked about this. There's no training to go into marriage or relationship. Somebody don't sit down with you. Okay, you're getting married or you're in this serious relationship. Let's talk about how to set boundaries and a budget and how to raise kids and these difficult conversations. You just get into it and you figure out, oh, you're screwed up, and then you're like, oh God, I'm screwed up. Now we got to deal with each other. Uh, but one of the podcasts I did was on boundaries, and it was don't take it personally when people start setting boundaries, because in a relationship, if I've got a divorce or if I decided to stay married, if all of a sudden Karen's going to start being more healthy for her and the family, and she's going to start setting boundaries on my side, I'm talking about from the receiver side, it's going to feel personal. I'm You've never said no to this. You've never said we'll talk about that
Yes.
later. You've always engaged with me. Why? What has changed, Karen? What is between us? Are you seeing somebody? Why do you not love me anymore? Why all of a sudden I'm feeling the vacuum of you're setting
Yeah.
boundaries with me. And the whole purpose of my podcast was when you see people that have been doing things in an unhealthy way start setting boundaries, try your best to step back and go, this is not a personal thing. This is something they are doing. And it's easy to say, but I hope that's not too much of a twist. But
It's perfect.
yeah.
I will say to clients, you have trained your spouse and your children to expect you to be selfless for so long, because that's the codependent pattern, right? I'll give up myself and I'll do for everybody else in the hopes of getting love, and then I'll feel martyred and resentful and all these things that
I thought that
I
was,
am a
I,
I
I'm
am a recovering
I am
codependent.
a
I am
recovering
like,
code. I'm a codependent too.
yeah,
I just thought that was
yeah.
going to a lovely place. Like I'll give love and affection and lose myself. So then I'll be loved and appreciated. And you went straight to so I can be resentful and bitter. And I'm like,
Well,
oh,
and that's what you end up being. It's like,
it
what do you mean you didn't notice that I did that? You didn't appreciate that I did that. And so, what I say to clients is, you've been training
uh,
all of your loved ones to expect you to be selfless for so long. So, the moment you start taking care of yourself and you go from selfless to self loving, they're going to call you selfish.
mhm.
They're going to say, how could you possibly? How could you possibly put yourself before me? How could you possibly? And so it's actually this really challenging thing for individuals to start setting boundaries or start taking care of themselves, because the feedback is the greatest fear. I don't want anyone to think I'm selfish or that I'm not caring or that I don't have a heart of service, because I do. But I'm
Mhm.
trying to go from being a doormat to being a self-loving human being. And so all the people who love me will most likely say, you stink. This is bad.
Do you on part of this challenge and you don't have to divulge too much, but is there times when I sit down with Karen and say, okay, Karen, here's what I'm the reason I'm saying no to this is it's not been good for me and us, or do you just do it and let them figure it out?
Well, this is a really inexpensive 5 day training
Yeah.
challenge, and so there's going to be
The how?
dialogue, but
Okay, good.
it's going to be more on a on a private Facebook community where they can say, "Here's my challenge," and I'll go back and forth with them.
Good.
Um,
Well, no, what
yeah.
I meant was, do you like, for instance, if I'm in a relationship with my wife and I'm going to start setting boundaries, do you encourage me to tell her, hey, by the way, I'm going to have to start setting some boundaries around this because it's not been good for me? I'm asking you a question on how to set the boundary,
Yes.
or do I just start setting boundaries out of thin air and let her figure it out? You know?
Well, because if you think about it, setting a boundary is inviting someone into an agreement. So let's just look at a simple one. Clint, let's say you and I are in a relationship, and I'm like, um, you know, there are times where you get angry, and I feel really intimidated, and it's the energy that's coming at me. And so when that happens, um, I'm going to step away. I'm going to ask for a timeout. I'm going to shut that. I'm not going to continue the conversation. And I just want you to understand where I'm coming from. Does that make sense to you? Now, in a decent relationship, the person's going to go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In a high conflict relationship, I shut you down, you shut me down, and
You're my
the
energy. Listen, let me tell you. You know when you roll your eyes like that, what do you think that does to me? Oh, you just don't ever give off bad vibes. Yeah.
so now I've set the boundary,
Uh
and
huh.
then you come at me the next day, and you're upset, and you've got big energy, and I'm like, Clint, I'm going to leave the room. I want to talk about this, and and you follow me, and so what people do after that is where they make mistakes. And so I'm just going to leave it at that. Like
I like this.
there's the setting of the boundary, there's the upholding of the boundary, and it's not what most people think it is.
Yeah.
And so there's the sense that clients say to me all the time, I tried to set boundaries. So it's not like you have to answer your question. It's not like I have to go, okay, Clint, now I want to have a better relationship with you.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
going to
Yeah. I
set
get
a
it.
boundary. But you are saying what it is. And then everyone's like, he
This is
didn't listen. She didn't listen. And that's because it's a
yeah.
two-step dance. And the second step is the upholding.
This relationship thing's tricky because there's also people out there that always say, I want to talk about this later, and they never resolve anything. They never talk about it later because when things are good and you try to bring it up, they're like, what are we bringing this up for? We're doing good right now. And it's like, and then when it comes up, they're like, we don't want to talk about this. Let's talk about it after everybody calms down. And now you're 2 years later down the road, and the same behavior is going on because nobody ever deals with it. So
And there's a boundary that you can set around it.
I probably need. Well, I'm not. I'm never. I don't date, so it's okay. That's okay. It's just me, myself, and I now, so we're all right. It's
You guys get along with each other
yeah.
pretty
We
well.
argue with each other every now and then. One of them's an asshole, but I'm not going to tell you which one. Because hey, two quick questions for you. Three. One is I posted on Facebook a few minutes ago. What's your favorite hymn? Your favorite
What
hymn at
is my
church? Favorite hymn? I've got like 50 something
God,
comments so far. So
I know. God, there's so many of them. Actually, one of my favorite ones that my church sings a lot is Revelation song. Kobe's, I forget
okay.
her
Yeah.
last name.
All
Yeah.
right, good. I just thought I'd ask. I mean, because
Yeah.
that's a good thing. Second, you had a mutual friend of ours on, Carissa Kay, in the last month or so, and I have not had a chance. I've got it pulled up right here in front of me, and I'm going to listen to it here in a minute when I work out. But did you enjoy that conversation? Isn't she a good guest?
Carissa's great.
Yeah.
She's great. Yeah. Yeah. I think that she does a phenomenal job of bringing the issues to the table and talking about. She's very neat that she talks about that which is so difficult, and she comes from the Bible Belt, and it's like I always find it fascinating that she's here. You've got this sex therapist Christian in the Bible Belt going, let's bring it on, let's talk about it, let's get really clear, because this sensual sexual thing is a creation of God's, and we
Yeah,
just
it's
need
what
to
she
know the
has it.
right way to
The, f-
handle it.
the first time I had her on, she was like, "Do you think God wants you to get married and then not have a good sex life with your partner that you're monogamous with and you're in this growing relationship with and you're hopefully praying with and studying the Bible with and that's other supposed to be taboo?" And I'm like, yeah, where's that been? And sometimes anyway, I thought she'd be good. And then the last question I have for you, unless there's other things we have not touched on that you want to make sure people know, is I want you to tell people, and I put a link over here to your website so people can go visit it, but how people get in touch with you, what's the best way to schedule an appointment? And this is the opportunity that if we missed something for you to jump in and make sure we tell people.
Well, so I will say, the one thing I'll say is, if you're wondering if you're in a toxic relationship and you're going to go and take the quiz, and if the boundary challenge sounds interesting to you, we also then kind of shepherd people from that challenge into a next step. And we have this really powerful 12-week high conflict support group um,
Mm.
that meets every other week and just has a ton of resources and support that's run by either me or one of the coaches, and we're launching a new one of those too. So there's a lot for people who need that kind of support to be able to move forward, and I'm excited about those new programs.
Good. And that makes me happy. And it seems like you've got a lot more to offer now. Your business has grown since I went through my divorce, and I'm glad because now probably a lot easier to find you. But now once you find you, there's all these practical things that I can get active in, engaged in, keep my brain busy with some healthy stuff. Is it jbddivorcesupport.com?
It is. And if you just typed in journeybeyonddivorce.com, it all goes to the same place. So whatever is easier for you.
And if people go to that, look at the top. There's a like a yellow little thin headline that says "Take the quiz" at the very very top of that page. You'll find it, and you take the quiz there. Karen McMahon, thank you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, Clint.
It is always fun and always informative and very helpful to a lot of people out there. And do you have another call you're about to jump on?
Actually, you may be the end of my day.
Well, I was going to ask you something. I'm going to end this, but can you stay logged in for a second? I want to
I
ask you
can.
a quick question. All right, bye everybody. Thank you.